Good morning, Mainers, and thank you for tuning in to another installment of the Maine Black News Network. My name is Malcolm Bennett, and I'll be your host for today. We have Jerome Bennett here, who works with Mayan, the Maine Youth Action Network, which is a part of the Opportunity Alliance, and he's going to be telling us today about his statewide Youth Policy Board. It's a youth-oriented group that helps to embed community voice and work with both parents and youth to help better improve the communities that they come from. With that being said, Jerome, could you tell us a little bit more about what the policy board, what the purpose is, what it's intended to do in the next couple of years? Just give us a brief overview.
Yeah. So the purpose of the policy board is this. Those closest to the problems are closest to the solutions. And I've done disparities work for about 8 years now, working across systems, so mental health system, juvenile justice system, out there with community organizations. And it's interesting because a lot of times people would normally hire a consultant, from out of state and bring someone else in to help them enhance their school, to help them make changes with their community organization, to help them with youth engagement, to help them enhance service delivery. And the content experts are really the people that are utilizing these services, And so the point of the statewide youth policy board is to create a space where we can actually foster the community's expertise as content experts, so that they can create an infrastructure to use stories, use these lived experiences to enhance the systems and services that they are receiving.
Okay. Let's backtrack a little bit. So when we talk about your experience and your qualifications, where are some of the places that you've worked? What makes you a reputable source for this statewide policy board? Why do people come to you for your consulting?
Well, I fell into this work accidentally.
Isn't that how they all fall
For real,
in?
right? And so I was going to school to take to get my doctorate in physical therapy. And while I was in school, I was working 2 jobs. And one was an in-home personal care assistant, and the other was a peer mentor. And in that peer mentor role, that really exposed me to social services. I grew up in Chicago, and we weren't exposed to anything. We didn't have any resources in our community, no community programming. Like, I literally didn't know social work existed, in the context that I know today. And eventually, when I became a peer mentor, the whole point of that job was to build relationships with young people that were experiencing homelessness, young people involved in juvenile justice system, young people involved in residential placements, like you name it. And through that position, I learned that peer support and personal connection is a pathway towards goal attainment. So I realized that me being out there and building an authentic relationship with you, where I respect you, I respect your beliefs, and even if you may not understand it, that respect is there, because everybody owns their own experiences, and you can't negate one's perception of their lives, So that mutuality, that respect piece is huge. And once you built those authentic relationships, you form a team, in essence. That bonding, that relationship, really evolves in a way where now you all are using each other as supports as they navigate systems, and you're in turn being an advocate, and supporting them with needs as they arise. So it kind of it ended up looking like case management, but I hate using that word because it's just what you do for friends, what you do for someone that you have a relationship with. You share resources, you communicate, you talk about problems, etc. So so that position really kind of opened up my eyes on how the importance that personal relationship has in terms of what we can say, navigating the systems and compliance with the system. Because now through our relationship, we're able to both develop skills and awareness so that we can navigate the system effectively, navigate around those disparities, navigate around those institutional biases and inequalities that exist and marginalizes people to varying degrees.
Okay. So, from my understanding, you've worked as a peer mentor. You've then transitioned into the DOC.
I was a community organizer after the peer mentor, where I was working in communities and the reason I took that position was because it was vague. It was like, go into the community, and this was in Lewiston, and it's like, identify and implement curriculum. And I'm like, oh, well, that sounds like a great opportunity for me to like...
Harder than it looks.
For real, right? Yeah. And so I really just embedded myself in the community for like 3 years. I was going to track meets, I was going to church, I was forming a relationship with schools and youth organizations, and I told people what I was there to do, but the point was building relationships. And eventually, people, I found out that a lot of young kids want to talk about the juvenile justice system, but it wasn't in a context that you and I would think about, like the contact points and, the judicial process. It was around the disparities that typically leads to juvenile justice engagement and involvement. And so they want to talk about health disparities. They want to talk about school to prison pipeline. They want to talk about substance use, These issues were prevalent. And so I started holding these conversations in communities. And my groups expanded, from like 20 to 30. And on top of that, to engage people, I started having community events. And I realized that through these relationships, there was a lot of stories that I heard that also reinforced like lived experiences that I've had, growing up in Chicago and going to public school and navigating poverty. People had different explanations and different versions of the same disparities,
So you've seen both sides of the system as far as bureaucracy as well as grassroots engagement.
And that is so important because a lot of people don't have that dual perspective. And it's that dual perspective that really puts you in a place where you can ground all of these theories and around poverty and these theories around best practices like trauma-informed, like my real life experiences ground these theories so that they can be implemented in the right way. And if you haven't been through it, if you haven't grew up in poverty, if you haven't been institutionalized, if you haven't been in and out of the foster home, like those experiences have value with it. And we need to acknowledge the value that comes with it and acknowledge the role that those experiences have in making our society better. And if we don't, then that's a version of institutional bias,
So let's get back to the policy board.
Yes.
The policy board serves to act as this method of projection or like a megaphone for the community, essentially. It's my understanding that this policy board is going to really help to not only help refine and kind of create the understanding using the upper echelons wording, but to be able to project their narrative in a different way directly to the policymakers, directly to the lawmakers, directly to the people who adversely affect their communities. So with that being said, when it comes to the policy board, where do you start? where are the many different layers? I assume there's some sort of pyramid or some shape, form, or fashion of gears and mechanisms that all work together to support this system that you're creating. From the ground up, where does this program start, beginning with you?
Awesome. So it starts in the community. And so right now I have a statewide youth policy advisory board, which is 9 people, and that's my core team. And they're composed of people from the community and Cumberland and York County right now. And we're expanding statewide, but I am starting at the community level. And so first and foremost, we have to build our identity. We have to have these conversations ourselves. We have to go through a certain process internally before we grow, you know.
So from the ground level, it starts with core engagement with the youth. How do the parents feel about that? Are you engaging the parents? Are they active in the process? Are they helping make decisions? Or are these youth just kind of transient and just coming in and out as they please?
Both. And we are engaging the parents as well, because when we talk about underrepresented community, the sense of family is so important, and to understand and hear perspectives from various various perspectives in general. You know, like those are important things that we need to actually capture. And so we have parent groups, we have our youth members, and those two councils work together, you know, and a lot of times the parent group is going to complement and support the activities that the young people are doing, you know, but we're really operating from that that point of family unit, you know, so that we can have each other's back and support each other's in reaching their goals, so that we can grow that safety network.
Okay, so the parents complement the youth, which is a great strategy, but through 2 separate groups. So one part you'll be directly engaging the youth, one part you'll be directly engaging the parents, and then obviously at some point you'll bring the 2 together so that they can engage with one another while engaging through the program. But let's talk about what the youth will exactly be doing in the program, other than obviously, you know, voicing their opinions, talking about race, talking about institutional bias, and getting that kind of knowledge base while, you know, laying a ground for where they can speak freely. But what exactly are they doing in the program?
And so when you talk about reform for underrepresented communities and populations, you have to use concurrent strategies. So a lot of time reform initiatives just focus on the reform aspect, you know. That can easily look tokenistic if it doesn't involve community building. It's like if day in and day out I'm going back to a community that's failing, then I can't just focus on reform. There's other realities that I'm forced to deal with that takes precedent, you know? And so if you're dealing with underrepresented communities, you have to have concurrent strategies, and that's why equity comes up time and time again. We need to take an equity approach to reform, and that involves community building. And so, like I said about me forming my relationships with my advisory group, we have to do that in communities across the state, and that happens through engaging people directly in those communities, supporting them in having some type of community event where we can mobilize community members and start to build those relationships. After we build those relationships, now we can start to talk about how an infrastructure will look, so that we can take these stories that are filled with a wealth of knowledge that we can use to better enhance the system. We can capture those stories in a way and build those relationships in a way where now we can integrate people and stories into this into the decision-making process that's happening across these systems to better inform the system.
Okay, so let me, you're hitting us with a lot, so let's break it down a little bit. So you're going to engage the youth as well as the parents, and you're going to get them also to work together through the program. With that being said, the program is adaptive to the different communities. Correct me if I'm incorrect, if I'm wrong, or if I'm misspeaking for the audience. So with that adaptiveness, you'll just be networking, seeing what each different community and what those youth groups and what those parents need in their environments. And then based on that, you'll hold different kinds of events and complete different strategies and different programs based on what the community's needs are. And then from that point, then we'll start working on voice and expressing yourself and things of that nature and getting to the proper channels. Is that correct?
Yes.
Okay,
yes.
okay. That sounds great. So from what I heard also, we talked about equity. What's the difference between equity and equality?
You know, when I talk about equity in terms of community context, equity, and let's just, equity is the creation and nurturing of self-sustaining communities. And so if I'm engaging in a practice that's equitable, then the practice that whatever it is that I'm doing is allowing the community to do it themselves. It's prepping the community to replicate or enhance that service and give back to their own community members so that they can address inherent problems in the community, given oppression and our history around racism and disparities that we face across the board.
So when you define an equitable strategy, basically that means giving them the tools they need to survive on their own, rather than. So how would you define equality then? If equity is teaching a man to fish, rather than fishing for him, how would you define equality?
Equality can easily look like, hey, you need to distribute that fish that you have over there to everybody. Equity is, hey, I need a few fishing rods and we're gonna go fishing. You teach me how you're doing that, and now, now I can set up this fishing shop and, provide to my community, and now we're talking about economic,
So in that
development.
sense, equity is truth and fairness, actually. So from my understanding, equity is like, I like to use metaphors. Equity is like, so we give everyone a box to stand on. Equality would be us all standing on the same size box. Equity would be us all standing on different size boxes in order to compensate for our height. Makes perfect sense to me. That makes so much more sense. One more question. When it comes to the State Policy Board, what's your long-term goal? Where do you see this, what's the, I take that back. Not what's your long-term goal, but what's your first short-term goal? So after you've gotten the youth engagement, after you've gotten the parent engagement, after you've cultivated this voice, what are you doing?
We're flooding the tables with community members, and they're gonna have support, and they're gonna have advocates, and they're gonna have, and in turn, the community can hold these systems accountable. Right now we have the systems holding themselves accountable. We have laws holding people accountable, so that they don't get sued. And you also have this culture of non-transparency, and because there's not much transparency, the community don't even have the awareness and in turn the skills, because that comes from awareness, to hold systems accountable where there are adverse replicate adverse replications of or adverse consequences of decision making and policy making. So that accountability standpoint is important, and this whole process is to have the community hold other people accountable and to equip the community with the skills and insight to hold other people accountable, and then actually holding other people accountable. And so part of the statewide youth policy board, we have a Maine prevention network, one of the largest networks across the state, and we have people to disseminate information to. Part of the program is we're going to have a youth-driven TV show. So now we can provide healthy eating tips on a budget. We could talk about reform on TV. We get to invite people and have those difficult conversations just so that the community and everybody can go through that process, be a part of the process, and be a part of that narrative and that conversation.
Okay. So now I want to move on to a different kind of conversation now that we've gotten an understanding for what the State Policy Board is and what its purpose is, and a general understanding of the track that it's on. But I want to start talking about what voice is. What is voice? Why is it important? And what are people saying now? What are these youth saying that is, why is it so critical? Why should it be broadcasted? Honestly, we can sit and we can say things need to be said and need to be important, but if we're not actually doing what needs to be done or saying what needs to be said or articulating ourselves, how can we truly be heard or understood? What does voice mean to you? What are the youth that you're engaging saying?
In part, you answered that question. What youth are saying is that they at the end of the day people want to be put in a position to succeed. People want to be put in a situation where they can be themselves. And they want to be in a situation where them being themselves is respected and acknowledged. And from that comes growth, So at the end of the day, everybody want to be a better person, And right now, because people that aren't most affected are the ones making the decisions, with that comes a different value system, if I've never seen someone strung out on drugs, or if I've never been strung out on drugs, or if I've never seen someone get kidnapped, or if I've never grew up in a house that was subjected to mass incarceration, those events creates a sensitivity in your perception, in your way of living, that a lot of other people don't have and the only way you can have it is if you go through those experiences. And so when you talk about a system like the schools and mental health systems, if you're making decisions and you don't have that sensitivity, then the system is insensitive. and when we talk about trauma, there's a lot of collateral consequences that comes from that insensitivity. And so it's completely, it can be perpetuated by lack of consciousness, lack of awareness, And so, for instance, what I hear kids are saying, kids are saying a lot of things. They're speaking to individual problems and challenges that they have as they navigate systems and problems that they have as while they're trying to be successful. And some of that might be, hey man, I was on probation, my mom was in the hospital sick, and I had to reschedule a few probation meetings, and they ended up sending a warrant out for my arrest. because I've had a probation meeting, but honestly, my mom died and I just really needed to be left alone. I couldn't deal with anything else, you know? And like, so now we're talking about trauma-informed policies, you know? I'm hearing your story, I'm looking at the facts in your story, and I'm realizing that at the end of the day, you know, decisions are being made as a response to the way that you're dealing with your mother's death. And with what we know about trauma and what we know about brain development and what we know about the implications of trauma on behavior, like that's a realistic response. And so why are we being punitive to it? You know? So that's the process that these stories need to all be filtered through so that we can make informed decision making from the bottom to the very top. And that's how we're getting this movement going.
With that being said, we've talked about equity and equality, we've talked about trauma, we've also talked about the statewide youth policy board, what its purpose is, why it's important, we've talked about voice, and we've gotten a great background from Jerome and as to why he is an expert on this subject. Thanks so much for tuning into the Maine Black News Network, and have a great day.